Good afternoon. I wanted to set up the slides for you guys who might have missed class and kind of talk through them because it's a little hard just to read the slides and get the full idea of what we were talking about. So week 4, we're focusing on Between the World and Me and digging into the text. In class, we're going to read a few pages in groups and to kind of go through the text. Starting after page 10, so everyone should have been at least to that point, we're going to read a section together in small groups and talk about it. And then we would start with these slides. So the agenda is to go over the essay prompt. We're going to talk about types of argument and then apply one of those types to quotes and then go over the discussion questions. So as a reminder on the essay prompt, we're looking at analyzing the American dream in light of Coates' argument. And so what this means is that Coates puts out this point that the American dream probably isn't available, or is not available to people of color, and particularly to African Americans because of the history of slavery. And he really wants people to kind of maybe rethink it. Should this be promoted? Should this be viewed as possible? Should people be shamed if they don't somehow make it in America? And so I want you guys to think about how you're going to argue that point. Do you agree with him? Do you disagree? And do you want to say to what extent? Okay. So I first want to give you an overview that there are different theories of argument. These are just 4. There are many, many, many. The first one, Aristotle's sort of form of argument was based on pure logical reasoning, which are these deductive forms of reasoning called syllogisms. And basically, like you see here, it says if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. They're very much focused on deductive reasoning, and they really had no interest in who the audience was. They were more the mental exercises of creating logic. Many years after that, another form that was often used by Perlman is also called the New Rhetoric form. And his form of argument says before you can even start, there's a point of agreement that has to be there between the two parties. And then argument can start, but he really views the audience as universal when you're appealing to points of argument. And so he doesn't look at variance in audience. And so that is a little bit of a limitation for many people in that form of argument. And all of these forms of arguments have steps, which I'm not going to go over. The third one is Rogerian theory. Carl Rogers, who is also a philosopher, he believed that you could never really change anyone's mind about something, but you could only reduce conflict. And you did that in a particular way by showing common ground and conceding things and giving the benefits of your side and kind of ignoring the opposition in a lot of ways, okay? But the last one is Toulmin, and it's Stephen Toulmin, who's a British philosopher, and this one's the most commonly taught, like in textbooks and things, and it's flexible to different kinds of audiences, and it also has both being able to take on the lack of logic in your opposition as well as the benefits of your own. So most people learn this one in school, and even if they don't know the name, and it's the most commonly taught. Here's a little bit about him. Again, it's more audience-oriented form of logic, and it contains 6 steps. These 6, we're going to focus on the first 3, and then the other 6 are really important for the analysis of an argument and to kind of look at the quality and for you to add more detail and kind of more specifics. But the first 3 are the most key and important. So the Toulmin Six Steps are the claim, which is kind of like, your thesis or your subclaims in your paper, your topic sentences. What are you arguing for? The grounds are going to be your evidence. What are you using to try to make your point? Personal experience, like in our last essay, or quotes from the book, or evidence from an expert. The warrant is a little more complicated, but that's sort of like the chain of reasoning and or the underlying principle that might not be overtly stated that is at work. And so we'll talk about that one a little bit more. Backing is the support or justification the reasons for your warrant. Your rebuttal is like if you want to make exceptions to your claim or give counterexamples to your opposition. And then qualification, if there's limits to the claim or the warrant or the backing, you want to show that there's limits and you kind of want to qualify something in the sense that you want to show it might not be applicable in all situations. Okay, so in more detail with the claim. This is a conclusion or thesis that you're trying to make. And I don't mean conclusion like the last paragraph of the essay, but something you want to try to claim or conclude. The first one we talked about claims of policy value and fact. So I'm just restating those and then giving you three that could be seen within the larger umbrella topic that we have here. So police brutality cases should not be decided by local prosecutors. That's, like a subpoint that we have and maybe in this essay. Another one, subtle racism is in ways more dangerous than overt racism because of the dreamers feel innocent. So this is that comparison type. And then the fact one, which is something else. Again, you have to prove it's true, but it sounds like a fact the way it's stated. Slavery cannot be ignored or brushed off when we consider the sanctity of the Black body. Okay, so those are three claims that could be subpoints in your essay. Your claims need to be clear and convincing. So if you look at these three claims, and in class I'm going to ask everyone to look at them and then to say, what are the differences here and why are some of them more convincing than others? And we'll have a discussion around that. And then on the grounds, the evidence that supports the claim, you might have examples that are real or imagined, testimony or experts or eyewitnesses, and statistics. Any of these might end up being actually a quote from a book. It could also be the examples might be personal as well, or they might be paraphrased from some other source. And then the way you set up your evidence and your main points might be deductive kind of reasoning or inductive. So deductive is you make your claim first, and then you use the evidence to kind of make it explicit and to try to prove your point. Inductive means you set up some evidence first as a basis for kind of proposing something new, and then you make your claim. This is important if someone's really unfamiliar with the claim you're making, or if you think they might be kind of really resistant to your claim. And so this is kind of key. The warrant is like a little bit trickier. It explains why the evidence or reasons support the claim or lead to the conclusion. So it is often unstated in the actual writing. For example, the example here is needle exchange programs should be abolished because they cause more people to do drugs. So that would be, if that was a claim someone was making, they would most likely believe that if you make risky behavior safer, that you encourage more people to do it. Would in fact, oftentimes the needle exchange programs do save lives because then people don't get infections and diseases and things. So there's a different kind of warrant behind that versus people who think needle exchange programs for like heroin users and stuff are a positive thing. Okay, oh, and I should just say on this one that it's important to know what the warrant is in your own argument, like what's your own bias at work. Or in your opposition, because you want to know sort of how best to argue the point. So the type of backing is important too here. So you want to talk about like why you're choosing your evidence. So maybe you're choosing it because it's more recent than your opposition. The study had a larger pool of subjects. Maybe your opposition lacks credibility. Maybe this person you're quoting from has a better education or background. Maybe your opposition has omitted some evidence that you want to bring up. And then your opposition might create a logical fallacy, which is like types of problems in logic that the logic is unclear or not true, and so it creates problems. And in class, I'll talk about either or fallacy and ad hominem, which means to the man in Latin, which is attacking the person instead of the point that they're making. So those are types of things to consider when you are thinking about how to argue. So with counter-argument, there's three major types. And a counter-argument works in your essay when you want to show your reader you're viewing other people's, you're taking seriously the opposition's views and you're really considering them in some way. So you might have a strategic concession where you say, yeah, you know, they're right in this way. And that's actually helpful to do because it brings your opposition closer to your point of view. You might also refute some aspect of your opposition because you're then showing a weakness in your opposition. So that's another way to counter-argue. The third way is to show why your opposition's point of view might not be relevant, even if it has value, to the point at hand. It might not apply clearly. It might be a bad comparison or something. So those are three really good approaches for counter-argument. So in class, what I'm going to have everyone do is to find in what they read a little earlier at the beginning, a claim that Coates makes, and then explain what the grounds or evidence was that he gave, and then see, is there a potential counter-argument here, or have you heard a counter-argument or response to this claim? That will be a good 15-20-minute discussion. People will share out, and then we'll take a break. Okay, and then when we come back in, we're going to put together with that same claim that they found, they're going to try to set up the transitional phrases for in a counter argument or in concession. So they're going to say they choose one of the three in the first column, one of the three in the second, and one of them in the third, and might say, it is true that many immigrants come to the United States for a better life and think that they're finding the American dream. However, when we consider what happens to African Americans and the history behind how they were used for labor for so long, you know, we might reconsider this view of the American dream. Therefore, the American dream might still be pursued, but maybe with more humility. So it is true that, however, therefore, and you can mix and match one from each column. And then everyone's going to write a paragraph together. And then the next set of slides are resource slides for you in case you are unfamiliar. I did send a thing out about slavery before with the video, but I wanted this as another source so you could see. The link has some really cool maps that are interactive that kind of show the disbursement of people and the statistics and census from different years after slavery. These are some institutions, financial institutions that directly benefited from slavery and or were used with money funded by slavery. And so including colleges, which are now dealing with sort of their histories that are kind of focused on the institution of slavery. Another area that Coates brings up is housing discrimination. And so before 1968, the Housing Discrimination Act, African Americans could be denied legally, and it wasn't actually enforced until the 80s, so it's really only been about 30 years since African Americans and Latinos and Native Americans could, you know, justifiably go to court easily if they were discriminated against in the housing. Okay. And then in class, we're going to watch this video about white migration to these locations that are all white neighborhoods and kind of why that's happening, and make connections to Coates. And then we're going to go over these discussion questions in class, the first 4 from the list that he puts together. Then we're going to go through, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. These were people that Coates mentions in the book, and we're going to give background on each of the cases just so everyone's familiar with them. You might already be, but Prince Jones in particular was the one who is his friend, who he talks about in the text. And then lastly, we'll watch this video. This video kind of gets to this idea of, well, if you work hard, you can make it. And he's an African-American top surgeon at UCLA, and from an act of racism that went uncontested, he ended up losing his job and had to fight for many years and go through a lot of stress. And in the past, he had never really had to deal with color because he was very wealthy growing up. And then he did get this discrimination lawsuit. He won, but it took many years, and it was very intensely difficult for him. A couple of recent cases, the Starbucks case, if we're going to talk about that a little bit, and then also these groups of students had school kind of promo thing and there was like 20 of the kids, and they lined up to spell out the name of their school. And their mascot. And then afterwards, the students got together and thought it would be, these white girls, and thought it would be funny to put this. And then they posted it on their Twitter account and thought it was hilarious. So it still shows that we still have these issues that have come up and continue to be in the news. So the homework is going to be to